Sexual trauma often fractures a person's sense of self into scattered pieces. Recovery requires diligent searching to re-own those pieces of self so they can come back home into a unified whole. This soul injury educational program is designed to help adults heal sexual violence that they experienced as a child or as a teen. If you've been fortunate enough to have not experienced childhood sexual violence in your life, I guarantee you there are people around you who have, and we hope that this material will also help you effectively support them. In my counseling practice as a psychiatric nurse practitioner, I also saw it a lot, even though most of my clients were not coming to see me for the sexual trauma that they had experienced. They were coming to see me for relationship issues, bereavement issues, or life transition difficulties. But somewhere along the way, the quote-unquote secret would reveal itself in one way or the other. My name is Deborah Grassman, and I am one of the founders of Opus Peace. Our nonprofit organization is very pleased to partner with Dr. Jo Wakila Jones to provide this learning opportunity. Dr. Jones earned her doctorate degree in healthcare education and has worked in various healthcare settings for 40 years. She's an Opus Peace licensed educator focusing on soul injury and sexual violence. She has a lofty vision of a world without sexual violence, and Opus Peace is proud to be able to help her achieve her mission of addressing this worldwide public health epidemic.
Thank you, Deborah. Several years ago, I made a conscious decision to ensure that my decades-long suffering in silence would not be wasted. And that has led me on a mission to ensure that I reach as many hidden, unheard, and silenced survivors of sexual violence as I can. You know, I spent 4 years getting my doctorate degree, and it was hard work. So hard that I swore I'd never do anything like that again. But what I didn't know is there was another class awaiting my attention, waiting for more than 60 years to be discovered. What was that class so carefully tucked away from my awareness? Well, it was a lesson about my vagina's traumatic story. I had never even verbalized its story. But one day, I took a class on the topic of soul injury. The first time I heard the word soul injury, my heart leapt out of my chest. Those words actually grasped what I had experienced. No one had ever quite put the right words to it, but now, here it was, right before my eyes. A wound that separates you from your real self. My real self? Suddenly, I realized what had gone missing each of the 4 times I had been violated. My real self immediately got obscured by facades that numbed out what I had been through. I also began to realize that sexual trauma, especially if it was committed during childhood, is one of the quickest and most pervasive ways of forgetting who you really are and what your purpose on this planet is. And forgetting what your purpose is, well, that's the second definition of soul injury. A wound to our being that prevents us from becoming completely whole in who we are meant to be. This was a class that had my complete attention. You see me here at the Soul Injury Institute as I listen to how others had recovered from their sexual trauma. That's when my vagina woke up. It not only spoke to me about the violence it had suffered, it spoke to me about the overwhelming helplessness it had felt. It spoke to me about the irrational guilt and shame that it was still holding on to. And I was stunned with these revelations. Suddenly, I let myself feel the burdens it had been carrying for decades. And it was a nebulous weight that I had been unconsciously holding on to. And it was starting to take form. Now there was a little bit of visibility in the fog. It felt so odd, and I felt heavy and liberated at the same time. In that moment, I knew I had work to do. And in that moment, I knew I not only could do it, I would do it. In fact, I still am doing the work. And I will tell you that that work has been more challenging and more difficult than obtaining my doctorate was. And it has also been more than worth it. Little did I realize that this moment in that classroom would launch me on a path to not only heal the relationship I had with myself, but to help other survivors of sexual violence do the same.
And we are glad you did, because many people are going to benefit from your message. Because Dr. Jones is going to use her story as a woman who was raped by men at 4 different times in her life, under 4 different circumstances, to provide these concepts. One of those violations occurred when she was a small child, and another occurred when she was a teenager. She'll tell you about those in this course. She'll tell you about the 2 violations that occurred when she was an adult in the Sexual Trauma Companion course called Wounds of Suffering. In this course, you'll also learn about soul injury. You'll learn about secondary wounding. You'll learn about trauma and the brain, and you'll learn about sex trafficking. Hope for healing the wounds caused by sexual trauma will be addressed, and the approach that we're going to use may be a bit different than what you might expect. It will include the self-compassioning process. It will include how to let pain and peace coexist without fear, and how forgiveness can liberate you from the trauma you may have experienced. This approach might best be summed up by Martha Ramsey. Martha Ramsey wrote the book Where I Stopped. It chronicles her recovery after she was raped at age 13. She spent decades living a counterfeit life as she tried to forget that it had happened. She pretended that it was in the past. She denied that it was still intruding in her life. She was suffering from a soul injury. Then she stopped the denial. And this is what she writes happened. One day it may dawn on you that it really did happen, and it happened to you, and you really were hurt. You will no longer need to decide whether to see yourself as victim or hero or both. Now listen carefully to what she writes next. You will not be healed, but your consciousness can embrace the whole of your hurt self. Wow. I'm going to say that again. You will not be healed, but your consciousness can embrace the whole of your hurt self. There it is. That is exactly what we at Opus Peace want to achieve with this course, expanding your consciousness so it can embrace the whole of your hurt self. Our goal is to give people an experience of themselves, their real self, to release fears of who they are and who they are not.
And I'm living proof of that. Opus Peace gave me the tools to re-own and rehome my hurt self. And that has given me a sense of wholeness that I've never had before. And my hope is that my story and these presentations will do the same for others. It has taken considerable trust and courage to remember and remember the scattered pieces of myself that became disconnected after each assault that I experienced over my lifetime. Each dismembering was different and yet the same. Each resulted in a soul injury. In some of the lessons, I'm going to tell you about my vagina's untold stories. I've given myself permission to bypass the fear of people's reactions to my story, reactions that are born out of silence. Silence is especially easy to achieve and maintain for multiple reasons. For me, I was only 4 when the first assault occurred. I wasn't yet able to articulate what happened to me at that age, except to have violent nightmares every night. But no one understood why my nightmares were occurring. This kind of silence creates an environment for the child to banish the part of self that was violated into unconsciousness. Research is now showing that numbing out the hurt changes the brain, especially in children because their brain is still developing. One of the leading researchers on trauma is Bessel van der Kolk. He wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And one of the things he observes is this: I'm struck by how difficult it is for victims to have gone through the unspeakable and then have to figure out how to convey the essence of their experience. Now, listen to what he says next. It is so much easier to talk about what was done to them rather than to notice, feel, and to put into words the reality of their internal experience. For me, learning how to notice and feel have totally shifted the relationship I have with my wounded self. Rather than being buried alive, that wounded little girl is now living again, here, now, in the present moment. You know, as survivors, we continue to be there and not know how to be here. And it takes work to be here, fully alive in the present moment, fully present to your real self. And I'm pleased to say that persistent work will indeed get you here. For me, it started with sensing the real self that was living behind my facade, a facade that had been created just to survive, a facade created by people around me who didn't know how to deal with my sexual trauma, nor my soul injuries. With each of my assaults, my family didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to help me. It was just easier to pretend like it was over and done with. The problem was, it wasn't over for me. I felt different now. I felt alone. I no longer fit in the way I used to. Worse, I was filled with shame. But I covered all that up, not just for 1 month or for 1 year, but for decades. And shame is one of the 3 primary causes of soul injury.
That's true. There are 3 causes of soul injury: unforgiven guilt and shame, unmourned loss and hurt, and fear of helplessness and loss of control. That is often what is at the core of a soul injury. And I will tell you that addressing these 3 causes is essential, because then you won't need numbing agents to cover them up.
The numbing agents that I used were excelling in education. I also numbed out by excelling in my work, holding regional vice president positions and presenting at national and international conferences. And tennis. I was nationally ranked number 3 in the American Tennis Association for people over the age of 35. These were things that kept my mind occupied so I didn't have to confront the consequences of the sexual trauma I'd been through. And these seemed to work really well. I fooled everyone, even myself. In fact, my mother once told me she never had to worry about me because I knew how to take care of myself. But my mother was wrong. I did not know how to take care of myself. What I knew was how to be a great actress, so good that I could even fool my mother. My whole world was a stage, and I was playing a part in the play that was my life. I was an observer. I was masquerading. The smile on my face was fake. My joy was manufactured. And I was performing a good imitation of sadness, happiness, joy, and sorrow when emotions were warranted. But I had difficulty making meaningful eye contact because I was afraid my scars would be seen. My soul was hurt. I was physically and emotionally aching. I remained broken inside for many years. So it was a myth that I knew how to take care of myself. The day I participated in soul injury leadership training was the day my vagina gained a voice. I heard stories of sexual trauma and it completely unmasked me and freed me from 60 years of unmourned loss and hurt, unforgiven guilt and shame, and fear of helplessness and loss of control. What a revelation I had. My vagina had a story, an untold story. The two Opus Peace interns, one male and one female, showed me their courage when they told their stories, and that gave me courage to listen to my own. And that's the day my healing began. Little Jo no longer had to bear her enormous burden alone, and my decades-long suffering was finally validated. And I hope this course will similarly liberate you.